Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take that stack of complex security docs, the architectural guides, the white papers, all of it, and we try to distill it down into something you can actually use.
Something strategic and hopefully unforgettable.
If you are working in the cloud today, whether you're in the middle of a big migration or just trying to survive the day-to-day,
Yeah,
you get it. The old ways of doing cybersecurity just don't cut it anymore.
not at all. We used to have this idea of a network firewall, right? A big castle moat.
Exactly, impenetrable walls.
Yeah.
But in this age of global cloud access, hybrid identity, remote work, that moat is, well, it's basically dry.
The walls have collapsed. That whole concept of a network perimeter it's obsolete. And that shift is, I think, probably the biggest change in modern computing architecture.
It has to be.
Public cloud systems, they just demand a different approach. The security boundary isn't around a network anymore. It has to be around the user. So identity is now the control plane.
And Microsoft Entra ID is that foundation.
It's the new security foundation. And, it's also the #1 target for attackers.
Okay, so let's unpack that and let's go straight for the highest value target. If identity is the perimeter, then the single biggest vulnerability has to be that standing always-on admin access. We're talking about those accounts with huge privileges, global admins, subscription owners, the ones that are just active 24/7. An attacker just needs one crack, one moment of access, and they're in.
And once they're in, they can establish persistence, move laterally, and that's when you get a catastrophic breach. That standing privilege is the attacker's goldmine.
Right.
So our core mission for this deep dive is really all about eliminating that, getting rid of that persistent, always-on administrative access.
How do we do that?
We use a specific architectural philosophy, and it's all centered on just-in-time principles, or JIT. We're basically shifting from a world where we give out permanent keys to a world where we issue a temporary key card for one specific audited task.
Okay, a temporary key card. I like that. So to do this, we have to get comfortable with the alphabet soup of security tools here.
There are a few key ones.
We're going deep on Azure Role-Based Access Control, or RBAC. Then there's the governance layer that enforces those time limits, which is Privileged Identity Management, or PM.
And that all falls under the bigger idea of just-in-time or JIT access.
And we're going to show you how these three pieces work together to secure everything. From the most powerful role, the global administrator, all the way down to just getting a secure connection to patch a single virtual machine.
Exactly.
Let's start with the strategic foundation then. The thing that underpins all of these tools. Zero trust. For decades we've had this implicit trust model. If you got past the firewall, you were basically trusted.
You're on the inside.
Right. So what does the guiding principle of zero trust force us to change fundamentally?
It forces a really radical shift in perspective. The mantra is never trust, always verify. Always. Zero trust just operates on the assumption that any access request, I don't care if it's from inside the network, from a known device, a known employee, it has to be treated as potentially malicious.
So every single time?
Every single time. Every access decision has to be explicitly verified in real time using every piece of data you have available.
Okay. And when we apply that idea specifically to managing identity, the sources always break it down into 3 core principles. Can you walk us through those?
Sure. So first we have verify explicitly. This means we're moving way beyond just a username and password.
It has to be more than that.
It has to be. We need to look at location data, device compliance, is the machine patched, is it encrypted, user risk history, even real-time behavioral analytics, all of that before we grant access.
Okay, that's number 1.
Second, and this is really the whole focus of our deep dive today, is use least privilege. This just means that access should only be granted for the time necessary, with the absolute minimum permissions required, and over the smallest possible scope.
This is our main defense against that lateral movement you mentioned.
It's the #1 defense. And finally, number 3, we have to assume breach.
Which sounds pessimistic.
It is, but it's realistic. We have to design our systems not to prevent a breach entirely, that's just not possible, but to minimize the damage, the blast radius, when a compromise does happen.
So if a global admin account gets compromised, the damage is limited because that privilege was only active for, say, an hour.
Exactly. The blast is contained.
That brings us right to the bedrock of this. The principle of least privilege, or PUL-LP. It sounds simple. But in practice, this is one of the hardest things for IT teams to do, isn't it?
It really is, because it's constantly fighting against the need for speed and convenience.
Right. What does it actually mean to be strict about POL-OP?
It means granting an admin exactly the permissions they need over the specific scope they need it for, and only for a specific period of time.
And the enemy of that is convenience.
Always. It's so much easier for a team lead to just assign the contributor role to a whole group at the subscription level, right? It's faster than carefully building a custom role that's restricted to just managing stored accounts in one resource group.
Of course.
But every single time we choose that convenience, we are dramatically increasing the attack surface. We're increasing the blast radius of a potential compromise.
So if that network perimeter is gone and everything is moved to identity, then Microsoft Entra ID really is the new control plane. What makes IAM so powerful in this model?
Well, identity and access management systems, IAM systems like Entra ID, they really function as the central security boundary. It's the engine that handles both authentication, proving you are who you say you are, and authorization, which is deciding what you're allowed to do.
And it does that across the whole Microsoft ecosystem.
The whole thing. That's what's so critical. Entra ID doesn't just manage your Azure infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's managing access to Microsoft 365, to your SaaS apps, even third-party cloud apps. It centralizes all of that control.
So if you secure that one control plane,
You get layered security across your entire modern estate. It's a massive force multiplier.
let's talk about the crown jewels within that control plane, the global administrator role. If we are assuming breach, we have to be treating these credentials with the highest possible security. So what's the non-negotiable best practice for how many of these accounts you should have?
The guidance from security regulators, from Microsoft itself, it's crystal clear. Organizations must limit the number of permanent global admins to fewer than 5.
Fewer than 5. That's a hard number.
It is, and it's not arbitrary. There's a solid strategic reason for it. 3 reasons, actually.
Go ahead.
First, it simplifies forensics. If a breach happens, your security team immediately has a very short list of high-value targets to investigate.
Right, you're not hunting through 50 accounts.
Exactly. Second, it reduces the phishing surface. Attackers love to target admins. Fewer admins means fewer targets for those really sophisticated phishing campaigns.
And the third,
It enforces a separation of duties. When you have more than 5, it kind of suggests that access is being granted for convenience, not for absolute necessity. And if an organization goes over this limit, they're going to see persistent alerts until they fix it.
that sets the standard for day-to-day operations.
Yeah.
Minimal permanent access, but we have to talk about exceptions because if you go too strict, you risk locking yourself out, don't you?
You do, and that's where the idea of break glass accounts comes in.
The emergency override.
Correct. The zero trust model requires you to have an emergency override. The best practice is that organizations must maintain 2, and only 2, highly secured break glass accounts.
And these are permanently active global admin roles.
They are. But, and this is crucial, they have to be cloud-only accounts. That means they are created directly in Entra ID and are not synchronized from an on-premises Active Directory.
Why is that cloud-only part so important for these specific accounts?
Because it creates a hard isolation boundary. Imagine your on-prem environment is completely compromised. A domain controller gets breached. The attacker could then get those synchronized credentials
And they be in the cloud too.
instantly. By making the break glass accounts cloud-only, you ensure that a successful on-prem attack cannot immediately translate into a total cloud lockout.
And the passwords for these.
Extremely long, unique, and stored securely offline. We're talking about an encrypted physical safe or a highly restricted digital vault with access granted to only a few designated people.
So if one of those break glass accounts is actually used, what's the required response?
It has to trigger an immediate, severe security incident alert. High priority, 24/7 monitoring. Its use implies something has gone catastrophically wrong with your normal access process.
Like a massive conditional access policy failure or something.
Exactly. The activity has to be verified immediately, and the credentials have to be rotated the second it's used. This friction is intentional. It ensures they are only ever used as an absolute last resort.
We've laid the strategic groundwork. Now let's move into the technical core. Azure RBAC. This is where we define those granular permissions, the just enough access piece of our security posture. If Entra ID is the bouncer at the door, RBAC is the list of what you're allowed to do once you're inside the building.
That's a good analogy. It works well. Azure RBAC is the native authorization system for Azure resources, and it dictates what specific actions an identity can take. And to really get access control, you have to internalize the structure of an Azure role assignment.
Okay.
It's the atomic unit of permission, and it always contains 3 elements that interact with each other.
Let's walk through that triad of a role assignment. How do they connect to define what someone can actually do?
Okay, so first you have the security principal. This is simply the identity that needs the access. It could be a human user, a managed identity for an app, a service principal for a pipeline, or a group of users. This is who you assign the role to.
Got it. The who.
Exactly. Second is the role definition. This is the collection of permissions, the explicit list of actions like read, write, delete. Azure gives you over 100 built-in roles like contributor or reader, but you can also create custom roles if the built-in ones are too broad.
So that's the what.
That's the what. And third, and this is maybe the most strategic part, is the scope. This defines the boundaries where the permissions apply. You have 4 standard levels in Azure: the management group at the top, then the subscription, then the resource group, and finally, a specific resource itself.
And that's the where. So who, what, and where.
Precisely.
Now, that scope hierarchy is so important because permissions are both additive and inherited. What does that really mean for an admin who's managing a big environment with lots of subscriptions?
It means you have to be incredibly strategic about where you make those assignments. Permissions you assign at a higher level, like a management group, they just flow down. They're inherited by all the subscriptions and resources underneath.
So if I assign contributor at the subscription level,
you are now a contributor to every single resource group and every single resource within that subscription. And if you're also assigned, say, storage account reader on one specific resource group, your effective permissions are the sum of both. You're a contributor everywhere, plus you have that explicit reader access.
Okay, so let's take a real-world example. A central security team needs to read all the logs across the entire company. Would you recommend assigning the security reader role at the top management group level, or should you do it on each individual subscription? What's the trade-off there?
That is a classic dilemma. If you assign security reader at the management group level, you give your central IT team instant sweeping visibility. It makes compliance audits so much simpler. But it also increases the blast radius if that central security account gets compromised. The attacker instantly gets read access to everything.
So what's the call?
We usually accept that risk for high-level read roles like reader or security reader because they can't do anything destructive. However, for a write role, like network contributor, you should never assign it higher than the subscription level, and ideally only at the resource group where the networks actually live.
The principle is always scope it as narrowly as possible.
Always, even for read roles, unless you have a strategic mandate like central compliance that overrides that localized risk.
Let's pivot to refining those role definitions. We can use custom roles, but there's this nuance of no actions. So let's say the built-in contributor role is almost perfect, but we need to block one specific action, like deleting core networking resources. How does no action solve that?
No actions is a really elegant tool for surgical permission reduction. When you define a role, you often use wildcards, right? Like Microsoft.compute grants access to all compute actions.
Sure.
But if you want a contributor to manage VMs but never be able to delete them, you use no actions. You grant the broad contributor actions, but you explicitly add Microsoft.compute virtual machines delete to that no actions array.
So it's an explicit carve-out.
It's an explicit denial. And the strategic value here is speed and control. If a new vulnerability is discovered that relies on one specific action in a big role, you can use node actions to carve out that single dangerous permission really quickly. It's much faster than redefining hundreds of granular permissions in a new custom role.
That makes sense. Okay, let's tackle the big point of confusion for anyone new to cloud security. The difference between Microsoft Entra ID roles and Azure RBAC roles. They have similar names, but they control totally separate things.
This is critical, and it's so often misunderstood. Microsoft Entra ID roles like global admin, user administrator, they govern the identity control plane. They let you manage the directory, users, groups, licenses, access to services like Exchange Online or SharePoint.
So identity management.
Exactly. Then you have Azure RBAC roles owner, contributor, virtual machine administrator. These govern the resource control plane. They let you manage the actual infrastructure, creating VMs, configuring storage, deploying web apps.
The stuff in Azure?
Right. And here's the most important point. A global administrator in Entra ID has zero control over an Azure subscription or its resources by default.
That surprises a lot of people.
It does. They can manage the users who have Azure roles, but they can't, for example, delete a virtual machine in Azure unless a specific setting is turned on to bridge those two control planes, or unless they are manually assigned an Azure RBAC role, like owner.
And what is that setting that bridges the gap?
It's called Access Management for Azure Resources. When a global admin enables that, they automatically get the User Access Administrator role at the root scope of Azure. Now, that doesn't let them delete a VM directly, but it lets them assign other users to the owner role.
So it lets them elevate their own privileges within Azure if needed.
Essentially, yes, it reinforces that separation of duties, but provides an explicit bridge when you need it.
That's a great clarification.
Yeah.
Now, moving to management best practices, we know there are service limits on how many role assignments you can have per subscription. So how do we keep our environment scalable and, frankly, manageable?
The first rule, the absolute first rule of scalability, is to always use groups for assignments, not individual users.
Always.
Always. It just simplifies the whole joiner, mover, leaver process. An employee leaves, you remove them from a few groups. You don't have to go hunt down 50 individual role assignments scattered across 3 different subscriptions. Second, to manage your really privileged roles, the ones we want to protect with PIM, you should use a specific type of Entra ID group called a role assignable group. These groups have a property, is assignable to role, set to true.
And what does that do?
It ensures that a privileged role, like subscription owner, can only be assigned to a group that has gone through specific governance checks. It's a safeguard. And it also helps with that service limit. By assigning a role once to a group, you're only using one assignment slot no matter how many members are in that group.
Okay, so RBAC defines the who, what, and where permanently.
Yeah.
But we still haven't solved that core problem of standing privilege. If we just leave an admin with prominent contributor access, an attacker just needs a few minutes to compromise that account and do damage.
Right.
This brings us to the governance layer built into Entra ID Privileged Identity Management, or PIM.
PI is the mechanism that takes those static RBAC assignments and introduces the element of time. It's what ensures access is strictly just in time. I'd argue it's the single most impactful tool an organization can deploy for zero-trust identity governance.
Because it just eliminates that standing attack surface.
It eliminates, 90% of it almost overnight.
The crucial concept that PI introduces is this difference between an active assignment and an eligible assignment. We need to be really clear on this.
So think of it this way. An active assignment is like having the key permanently bolted to your keychain. You have standing privileges. The role is always on. This is a huge security risk because if your credentials get stolen, the attacker has immediate access.
And this should only be for
service principals that need 24/7 access, and for those 2 highly secured cloud-only break glass accounts we talked about. That's it.
And an eligible assignment.
An eligible assignment means you have the potential to get the role, but it's dormant. You don't have the key. You have to go through a request process to get it. The role is inactive by default, which means it represents almost zero risk.
And this should be the default for everyone else.
For every single standard administrator in your organization.
Yes.
Let's walk through the JIT role activation lifecycle for an eligible user. Let's say an admin, we'll call her Sarah, needs to do some maintenance. What does that secure workflow actually look like?
Okay, it's a very structured and auditable process.
Yeah.
First is the request. Sarah logs into the Entra ID PIM portal. She finds the eligible role she needs, say virtual machine contributor, and she clicks activate.
Simple enough.
Then the duration. She has to specify how long she needs the role for. The policy might set a maximum, maybe 4 hours.
Third, and this is critical, is the proof. She has to satisfy the policy requirements. The most important one is a fresh multi-factor authentication check. This re-authentication stops an attacker who might have stolen a session cookie or a password from just elevating their own privileges.
Next.
The rationale. She has to provide a detailed business justification. Usually this is a ticket number from a system like Jira or ServiceNow.
So it's tied to an actual task.
It has to be. And then for the really critical roles, like global admin, there's a 5th step, the governance. The policy will mandate approval. So Sarah's request actually pauses until a designated approver, her manager, a security officer, explicitly validates the need.
And once all that is done,
once all the checks are met, PIM makes the role active, but only for that set duration. When the time expires, PIM automatically removes the assignment, and Sarah instantly goes back to a zero access state. That automatic deactivation is the key.
But that raises a practical question one I hear a lot. You mentioned a 4-hour limit. What happens if an admin is in the middle of a complex 7-hour incident? Doesn't this kind of operational friction just encourage people to find shortcuts?
That's a fair challenge. It's that classic trade-off between security and operational reality. So if an incident is running long, the admin has a couple of options, assuming the policy allows it.
Right.
First, if she's nearing the end of her 4-hour window, she can go back to PM and request an extension as long as it doesn't exceed the configured maximum, but she'll have to go through the MFA and justification process again.
And the second option?
Well, this is more about setting the policy correctly in the first place. The policy should allow a maximum activation that covers, say, 90% of standard tasks. Maybe 4 hours for global admin, but maybe 8 hours for a lower privilege role like password administrator. The friction is the point. The shorter the window, the less time an attacker has to work if they do compromise the session.
Let's talk more about those configuration best practices. Beyond just the duration, what settings are absolutely non-negotiable for high-privilege roles?
There are a few that really define how effective PIM is. First, require MFA. This has to be mandatory for all eligible roles, no exceptions. Stolen credentials are useless if they can't pass that MFA check at the moment of elevation.
Number 2.
Enforce justification. Requiring a business justification or a ticket number is vital for compliance and for your audit trail.
Makes sense.
Third, require approval. For your highest value roles, global admin, privileged role administrator, you have to enforce explicit approval from someone else. It separates the request from the execution. It's a human check.
What else?
You should disable the option for permanent assignments when you configure the role, forcing everything to be eligible and time-bound. And finally, notification settings. Make sure notifications are enabled for all role activations. Your security team needs to know in real time when a critical role like global admin is activated.
I want to spend a moment on PIM for groups. You called it a huge productivity booster earlier. Can you unpack the architecture there and why it's so efficient?
Yeah, PM for groups solves the I need 3 different roles to do one job problem. Imagine an admin, David. He needs to deploy a complex app that requires access to network contributor, key vault secrets user, and storage blob data contributor. 3 separate roles.
Okay.
Without PM for groups, David would be eligible for 3 roles. He'd have to make 3 separate activation requests. That's 3 MFA checks, 3 justifications, maybe 3 approvals. It's a ton of friction.
Right.
With PM for groups, you create one security group, let's call it Project X Deployment Team. You assign the 3 roles to that group as permanent active assignments. Then you make David an eligible member of that group.
Ah, so he activates his membership, not the roles.
Exactly. He makes one JIT activation request to join the group for 4 hours. Once he's in, he gets membership, and through that, he gets access to all 3 linked roles at once. It massively reduces the overhead while keeping that JIT security posture.
That seems almost essential for real-world adoption. Okay, one last thing on this. We've talked about eliminating standing access, but what about the risk that eligibility itself just accumulates over time? How does PIM address that privilege creep?
That is addressed through access reviews. This is the long-term governance for eligibility. The goal isn't to audit the activation. PM's audit logs do that. It's to audit the ongoing need for someone to even have the potential to activate the role.
So it's a periodic checkup.
It is. PM automates these reviews, say monthly or quarterly. A reviewer, usually a manager, gets a pump to attest whether each user still needs eligibility for that role. If someone's job has changed, the reviewer clicks deny, and PM automatically removes their eligibility.
It keeps the list of potential admins lean and current.
It stops that silent, steady accumulation of unnecessary permissions over the years.
We focused a lot on the identity roles. Now let's zoom in on a specific highly exposed workload. The virtual machine. The threat here is classic, isn't it? Attackers using bots to just scan the internet 24/7 for open management ports.
Oh, yeah. RDP 3389, SSH 22, they are just constantly being hammered. And these open ports are just a massive, unnecessary risk surface.
And too often, organizations just have these wide-open network security group rules.
Right. They'll allow traffic from their entire corporate IP range, which is huge and static.
Yeah.
We need to apply JIT principles directly to the network access itself. And in Azure, we have 2 really powerful layered ways to do that.
Okay, let's start with the network control method. Defender for Cloud's JIT VM access feature. How does that work to shut the door on those ports?
This is a purely network-centric solution. It focuses on dynamically managing the firewall state. When you enable Defender for Cloud JIT for a VM, The system automatically configures your NSGs or your Azure firewall to enforce a baseline policy of deny all inbound traffic on those management ports.
So the ports are just invisible to the internet by default.
Exactly. They're unreachable. Then, when an admin needs access, they request it through the Defender for Cloud portal. The system checks their Azure RBAC permissions to make sure they're authorized.
And if they are.
If they're validated, Defender for Cloud temporarily modifies the NSG rule, and it's a surgical modification. It creates a new rule allowing traffic only from the requester's specific source IP address and only for a limited time, maybe 3 to 6 hours.
And when the time is up.
The temporary rule is automatically removed, and the VM goes back to being invisible. It just dramatically shrinks the window of opportunity for an attacker.
That's powerful network isolation. But there's a gold standard zero trust approach that combines this with the identity governance we just talked about. Integrating Azure Bastion with Microsoft Entra PI.
This is the strongest model, period, because it eliminates public exposure entirely while securing the identity of the person trying to access the VM. Azure Bastion is a fully managed POS jump box. It lets you connect to your VMs through a web browser using SSL.
Which means no RDP or SSH ports exposed to the public internet at all.
None. The VMs don't even need public IP addresses.
Let's walk through that scenario again. Our user, Adam, needs to patch a VM using this integrated approach. How does the identity piece from PIM interact with the network piece from Bastion?
It's a beautiful example of layered defense. So
Yep.
First, you have the zero access baseline. The VM is protected, no public IP, only the Bastion subnet can talk to it, and Adam has no standing access.
Okay.
Second, eligible privilege. Adam is configured in P as eligible for an Azure RBAC role, specifically the virtual machine user login role. That's the identity permission he needs to authenticate inside the VM.
So he requests activation.
Right. JIT activation. Adam goes to the PM portal, requests activation for his role, does the MFA check, provides justification, all the things we discussed. PM then activates the role for 4 hours. He now has the temporary identity privilege.
Now he can connect.
Now he connects. He goes to the Azure portal and connects via Bastion. Bastion uses his activated Entra ID credentials to authenticate the connection. Because he has the right active identity role, Bastion facilitates that secure SSL connection.
And after 4 hours.
Automatic revocation. PIM revokes his virtual machine user login role. The Bastion gateway is still there, but Adam's identity is no longer authorized to use it to log into that VM. His access is instantly terminated.
And what I love about this model is the full session auditability. You're not just auditing the PIM activation, but Bastion itself can record the session.
That's right. For high compliance scenarios, Bastion can record the entire graphical RDP or command line SSH session. That recording gets stored securely in an Azure storage account, and it gives you an irrefutable audit trail of every single thing Adam did during his elevated 4-hour window.
It closes the loop on accountability.
Completely.
Everything we've discussed so far, RBAC, PM, Bastion, they're all components of this bigger philosophy. Defense in depth. It's about having overlapping security measures, so if one fails, the next one holds.
Exactly. And when a threat actor gets that initial breach, their first goal usually isn't to steal data. It's to achieve identity lateral movement.
They pivot.
They pivot. They use weak or standing credentials to move across systems, looking for a path to the most valuable assets. Our entire JIT framework is designed to eliminate the standing access that makes those pivot points possible.
So if we look at the highest priority actions to stop that identity lateral movement, what is the absolute #1 thing organizations have to implement today?
It's still authentication string. You have to mandate phishing-resistant MFA for all your users and especially for your administrators.
So not just any MFA.
Not just any MFA. Standard methods like push notifications or SMS codes, they're vulnerable to prompt bombing or man-in-the-middle attacks. Phishing-resistant MFA, using something like a FIDO2 hardware key, relies on cryptographic proof. It effectively eliminates the attacker's ability to proxy the session. It makes stealing credentials exponentially harder.
And on top of that,
You have to block legacy authentication protocols entirely. Things like POP3 or IMAP, they often bypass modern conditional access and MFA policies completely.
beyond authentication, how does the architecture of the environment itself help stop lateral movement? We hear about segmentation a lot.
Segmentation is non-negotiable. You have to separate your production, development, and testing environments into distinct landing zones, usually at the subscription level. This contains the blast radius. If a dev environment is compromised, the attacker still faces a hard boundary before they can pivot to production. And we have to reiterate the importance of using cloud-only accounts for privileged roles. A common attack vector is stealing credentials from an on-prem Active Directory. If those accounts are synced to Entra ID and hold privileged roles, you've got a cascade failure.
The on-prem breach becomes a cloud breach.
Instantly. Using cloud-only, Entra ID native identities for all your privileged assignments ensures that a local compromise can't automatically grant access to your cloud environment.
Let's talk about some governance tools for restricting scope internally. We need to be able to delegate tasks without giving admins the keys to the whole kingdom. This is where administrative units, or AUS, come in, right?
Yeah, they do. AUS solve a really complex delegation problem in big companies. Historically, if you wanted a service desk agent in your APAC region to be able to reset passwords just for APAC users, you had to give them a tenant-wide role, like password administrator.
Which gave them power over everyone, globally.
Exactly. AUS allow for micro-delegation. You create an administrative unit called EPAC users, and you put only the user accounts from that region inside it. Then you assign the password administrator role, but you scope it to that specific AU.
So now they can only manage users within that defined unit.
That's it. It dramatically reduces their potential blast radius if they get compromised.
And there's an even stronger version of this now, Restricted Management Administrative Units, or RMAUs. Why are they even better?
RMAUs are designed to protect the highest value targets inside the directory itself. Think about your C-level executive accounts or the core security groups you use for PIM. You put those objects inside an RMAU, and it prevents even global administrators from modifying them.
Wow, even global admins.
Unless that global admin's role itself is specifically scoped to manage that RMAU, which is almost never the case, it provides this essential layer of internal isolation against misuse of even the most powerful roles.
Finally, we have to talk about the audit trail and monitoring. PMN gives us the history. But what tools do we need to actually detect the anomalies that signal an attack is in progress?
Proactive detection is key. PM logs every activation, but we need to use powerful SIEM tools like Microsoft Sentinel or Azure Monitor Logs to look for patterns of suspicious activity.
What kind of patterns?
We need alerts configured to detect things like bursts of activation requests. Multiple admins activating critical roles in a short time might signal a coordinated attack, or unusual geographic logins immediately followed by a PIM activation.
Or changes to security groups.
Or attempts to modify security groups that should be protected by an RMAU. Your analysts have to be actively hunting for things like someone trying to disable audit logging or changing conditional access policies right after a high-privilege activation.
And one last technical detail on preventing lateral movement. This nested group risk within PM. Why do we need to keep our role-assignable groups flat?
This is a really sophisticated lateral movement technique. We know role-assignable groups are essential for PM. The risk is when you have deep nesting. Let's say an attacker compromises a mid-level admin, Alice. She's a permanent member of a general IT management group.
Okay.
Now, if that general IT management group is allowed to manage the membership of a high-value role-assignable group, a group that has permanent owner access to a subscription, the attacker has found a path.
So Alice, through her mid-level group, can just add herself to the high-privilege group.
And instantly gain owner privileges, completely bypassing the entire PM activation process. The best practice is to make sure your highly privileged role-assignable groups only contain individual users managed directly by PM. No nesting. It closes that identity pivot point.
This has been a true deep dive into modern cloud security. The overarching takeaway seems so clear. The path to a secure cloud environment runs directly through identity. We have to ruthlessly shift our mindset from convenience and permanent access to security-driven temporary access.
Absolutely. By strategically using Azure RBAC, you set up that just enough access, the minimum permissions and scope. Then you layer in Microsoft Entra PIM and JIT principles, and you achieve just-in-time access. And that eliminates the standing privileges that are, the #1 target for attackers.
It's not just about tools, it's a whole new security architecture.
It's an architecture where access is verified, it's time-bound, it's fully auditable, and it's constantly being reviewed.
It does require strategic planning. It requires consistent effort to implement PM and retrain admins, but that complexity seems absolutely worth the trade-off.
Without a doubt. The operational effort of implementing PIM is so much less than the catastrophic fallout, the financial, reputational, compliance cost of a breach caused by one standing administrative account. You're moving from being reactive to being proactive.
So as we wrap up, here's a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. If you're committed to the zero trust model and you've implemented PM, so nearly all your privileged roles are eligible and time-bound, you should have almost zero standing access. But we did acknowledge two necessary exceptions. So what two roles, if any, still have permanent active status in your environment? And more importantly, why are you so confident that they are sufficiently protected against a highly motivated attacker?
Go and audit those permanent assignments right now. If they are not those two highly monitored cloud-only break glass accounts, and if they aren't protected by FIDO2 keys and stored offline, you have critical immediate work to do.
You have an identity gap to close.
Your most exposed one.
That is a challenging but necessary piece of homework. Thank you for guiding us through this vital deep dive into identity security today.
My pleasure. Stay secure.
We'll catch you next time for the next deep dive into the sources.